Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Q&A on the spiritual life with John Curry. And today we are addressing the topic of marriage and the spiritual life. Jean, it seems to me that the church teaches, the Vatican II, for example, the universal call to holiness, that every one of us, whether married or lay or not, or single or consecrated or religious, every single one of us is called to the heights of holiness. Yet, St. Paul, in the letter to the Corinthians, clearly states that it is better to not be married because then the person becomes anxious of the things of the Lord, and not like in the case of a wife, for example, that if she is married, she won't be free to care for the things of the Lord, but will be concerned with the things of her husband. And likewise with the husband, if he's not married, he can take care of only the things of the Lord, but if he is married, he's going to be concerned with pleasing his wife. It seems to me that they are at odds. On one hand, we have the church saying everyone is called to holiness. On the other hand, we have St. Paul saying, well, it's going to be difficult, almost making it sound impossible. How can we reconcile these two?
Hi, Camilla. Hi, everybody, and thank you very much for your question. It's an audacious question. Of course, before starting, I would like to underline the fact that we are dealing with two realities here, and we are trying to see how they interact. One is the sacrament of marriage as it is understood by the Catholic Church. And on the other hand, we are dealing with the spiritual journey. And of course, that spiritual journey normally leads to holiness. So how the two interact together, that's the general gist of this video and the previous two videos. Yes, on one hand, and I think you're quoting the first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 7. Is that correct?
Yes, I had it here, and it is chapter 7.
Yeah, it is in this chapter that St. Paul addresses the issue of consecration, virginity for the kingdom. It is absolutely true that what St. Paul says is correct. Dedicating one's life totally to the Lord in virginity, or if you prefer, in celibacy within a consecrated life, is normally a better way, an easier way to reach holiness.
Sorry, John, it's chapter 7, verses 33 to 34.
Thank you. Chapter 7 of the first letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians, verse 33 through to
34.
34.
That's exactly it. Okay.
Yes. It is absolutely true what St. Paul says. Nobody can deny that technically, practically, you have you dedicate all your energy, all your time, your body, your mind, your emotions to the Lord. So obviously, you answer better the call to holiness, or the call to union with God, the call to the fullness of love. There is no discussion about that, because practically, if you consecrate yourself in the church, in a religious order, monastic order, etc., you are receiving a lot from the richness of the church, from the masters of the spiritual masters, from a rule that is approved by the church to be a means for holiness, and from the help in the community from elder people who have more experience. That's absolutely correct. But bear in mind that we are talking here about a person who already received the call. We are not talking in general terms. St. Paul is not comparing in general terms religious life or consecrated life or virginity for the kingdom with married life. He's talking to a person who hears Jesus' call
I
and
see.
is offering two possibilities. He's not talking to an average married person saying, do this, or an average person, I would say, shall I marry, shall I not marry? No, because an average person in general would tend to go for marriage. But he's not, in my humble understanding of the issue here, he's dealing with something that is slightly a different question. The question is, I'm called to follow Jesus. So therefore, which way shall I choose? Which way is better? You see, that's a different question. Why? Because we have to consider that you very rightly mentioned the call, the universal call for holiness that we find in the Council Vatican II. Of course, it's coming from the Gospel. The Church doesn't reinvent the wheel. The wheel is already in the Gospel. But the Church is reminding us in the Council Vatican II, in the document called Lumen Gentium, the constitution called Lumen Gentium, I think it's chapter 5, if I'm not wrong, the universal call for holiness. But the document doesn't say, and a very important point here, doesn't differentiate between the call and hearing the call. We are all, since we are baptized, we are all called to holiness. That's the theory. It's correct. Nobody can question it. Why? Because it comes from our understanding of baptism, to the point that the renewed theology of consecrated life and of baptism says the following. It says that religious life is not adding anything to baptism. It's not a new sacrament as it was perceived centuries ago. No, that when you are pronouncing your final vows, you are receiving a sacrament. In the very early centuries, some of the theologians and the masters thought that it's a sacrament. Of course, it is a grace. No question about that. It is, but it's not recognized, if you want, as a sacrament. So the more recent theology tends to say that consecrated life is not adding a new sacrament, is not adding, more precisely, something to baptism, but on the contrary, it is developing baptism properly, which I like. You see, I like this point. So we are coming back to baptism and trying to understand baptism. Baptism per se is Jesus himself, the triune God himself, sown in us like a divine seed, and is called to develop and become the biggest tree, which is the union with God, the fullness of love, etc. So now, if you contemplate baptism as a consequence, or if you contemplate the Church, which was the purpose of Council Vatican II, as a consequence, the Church is supposed to be holy. Baptism is a holy thing, so you say that everybody is called to that holiness. But from that, forgive me, theory, it is true, it's the truth. I do not question that at all. I wouldn't be Christian or Catholic if I question that. I don't question anything that the Church teaches, by the way. But I'm trying to understand. So if on one hand, theoretically and truly, everybody is called to holiness, hearing at a certain point in my life as a Christian person, a parishioner of a place in the world, no, a parish in the world, no, when I hear the call, that's a completely different issue. And I think that St. Paul is talking to this person, not in general terms. He's talking to a person who discovered Jesus, but Jesus, dealing with Jesus on a daily life. So it's rather closer to the second conversion, no? So, and the questions himself or herself, what am I supposed to do? Shall I marry or not? So the person heard the call. And obviously, in this case, you use the better means. And the better means are the quicker, the stronger, the faster, the more secure. And this is consecrated life.
Right.
Theoretically, no question about that. I'm so sorry if I disappoint some people, but there is no question about that. Now, why? For the reason I explained before. Because consecrated life is meant to offer you all the means in order not to lose time and energy in any other things. So it's totally in tune with what St. Paul says. If you're married, you're busy with something else. Well, if you do that, you're not busy, etc. Now, the question doesn't present itself to the average person this way. It's like, for instance, let me give you another example, a strong example coming from the gospel. Jesus at a certain point, I don't have the exact reference, but at a certain point says, people, when he explained, I think it's chapter 19 in St. Matthew, when he explains marriage and divorce, so the apostle says, if this is the condition, and he explains that one has to be faithful to his wife for all his life. So the apostle says, if this is the condition of marriage, well, it's better not to marry. And Jesus continues here and says, you see, faithfulness is a struggle from day one. It's not because we are who we are. We are poor people. And faithfulness applies as well to consecrated people. It's not only the married people and single people as well. You know, we are all called to faithfulness. It's not a category of people who are called to faithfulness, by the way.
Right.
Parenthesis. So they say to him, if this is a condition between a man and a woman, it's like you have to have your wife your entire life. For you. So if this is the consequence, then better not to marry. Jesus continues and says, people who are called to that understands that and dedicate themselves. Of course, he uses the image of castration, no, becoming eunuch.
The eunuch, yes.
Yeah, for the kingdom, okay?
Right.
Of course, he never meant the physical castration, but he meant the fact that then you understand that there is a higher reality and you dedicate yourself to that higher reality. So here, this is a strong statement here. But when there are people who struggle with this verse, and they ask me, what do you think about this verse? My answer is simple. The person who is called receives the grace to understand that verse.
Right.
The person who is not yet called, they struggle with it. It's not for them yet. I added yet, even if they are married. You see, so there is a grace that this is what we need to take into account. The gospel preaches something that is simply impossible without the grace of God. So the true holiness, the true journey of holiness, you are married, you are not married, you are consecrated, you are not consecrated, is something that is beyond our means anyway. So let us take into consideration this dimension. The grace of God is there, he's pushing me. Now, yes, what St. Paul says is true, but say now you have a case in order to answer a little bit your question, because I'm sort of not answering it directly. So I don't mean to do that, but it's just to clarify the concept. So say you have a couple or a person who is married and then discovers the call to holiness. Big question. Will she or he leave marriage because of what St. Paul says, or because of what Jesus says in the Gospel of St. Luke? No, he says to the person who doesn't deny his father, his mother, his daughter, his son, and in St. Luke he adds his wife, which is a bit shocking. And it did happen in the past. It did happen in the past in the monastic life in Egypt. We have a case where a man was married and then he left everything. But today in the church it's absolutely forbidden unless the wife and the kids, if the kids are below the age, it's not accepted. But if they are above the age of 18 or 21, and if the wife or the husband is consenting, well, then that's possible. But these are very rare cases, okay? So why I was quoting that, I forgot. So you have the case of a person who is married, and then he or she hears the call. Well, then you are married. You cannot abandon marriage. You have to continue. But then you have to see how the call will work in your actual state. You're not called to change state of life because that other state is better. No, your state is the best because it's yours. Your state is the best because it's yours where you are. And here comes the question. When does God call you? In which state you are when God calls you? And there is a tradition in the church to say it's better if you stay in the state where God called you. So if you had a call when you were married, well, of course, obviously you will stay married. But if you had it before marriage, well, then it's better if you think twice before taking a decision. You're still free, as St. Paul says in this beautiful text you read. You're still free, even if you're married, that you're not committing any sin. But you have to consider it. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, this is good. We're at 13 minutes. So yeah, this is such a big topic, and I think it needs a lot of attention, especially nowadays. There's a lot of confusion about marriage, and especially how to be holy in marriage. So thanks everyone for joining us in today's Q&A on the spiritual life with Jean Coury, and I'll see you again next time.
Thank you very much.